My name is Elena Carter. I was 27 when my whole world collapsed in a single night. One moment I was a wife and a mother clinging to the dream of a family. The next, I was standing in the freezing dark with my baby girl Sophie pressed against my chest. My husband Brandon had slammed the door on us suitcase in hand, and my parents followed soon after, their porch light flicking off as if we never existed. I walked the streets with everything I owned stuffed into 2 garbage bags, the wind slicing through my thin jacket. Sophie's cries louder than the traffic overhead. Under the highway bridge, rain dripped through cracks and splattered on her blanket, and I told myself, this is the bottom. But it wasn't. Out of the storm came polished shoes, a black umbrella, a man whose sharp blue eyes seemed to know my name before I spoke it. He bent toward me and said, "Elena, I'm your grandfather. I've been searching for you." Little did I know that this stranger would pull me into a war far older than my own heartbreak. He said those words as if he'd been carrying them for years, but what he didn't know was that I had already begun piecing together fragments of a secret whispers about money gone missing, an inheritance hidden, a betrayal that split my family long before I was born. I kept my face calm, though inside my heart pounded like it would burst. Should I confront him right there or keep listening, keep gathering what I needed to truly understand? What would you do? Face the truth head on or stay silent until the time is right? Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. I grew up in a 2-story house that always smelled like lemon cleaner and something overcooked. The carpet was the color of wet cardboard flattened where Dad's recliner dug its metal feet into the pile. The TV was always on murmuring sports or news like a third parent that never looked up. If you opened the front door around dinner time, you'd hear forks scraping plates and my mother's voice cutting through the air like a ruler slapping a desk. "Don't slouch, Elena. Don't talk with your mouth full. Don't be difficult." I learned early that being seen was the fastest way to be corrected and being invisible was the safest way to live. Daniel never had to learn that. He was born with a spotlight attached according to Mom. She called him our golden boy, as if God had dipped him in honey and handed him to her from the clouds. Every trophy he brought home went on the mantle. Every B+ he turned into an A in a teacher's mind. At Christmas, his gifts were the kind that had weight and metal and brand names. Mine had the crinkle of tissue paper and the soft apology of socks. Once when I was 9, I won a spelling bee. I brought home the cheap plastic medal still warm from my skin and held it out like a little son. Dad glanced over, said good job without looking away from the TV, and then asked Daniel how basketball practice went. My medal lay on the kitchen counter for a week, then disappeared. Mom probably cleaned it into the trash. You learn after a while to hold your own applause in your throat and swallow. It burns a little going down. It leaves a taste copper and soap. Saturdays smelled like bleach and grocery aisle air. Mom would hand me a list and a stack of coupons while she talked on the phone to Aunt Claire about Hannah's baby shower and whether the church basement was big enough. Hannah wasn't family yet, not then. She was Daniel's on and off high school sweetheart who could do no wrong. She baked things that rose perfectly and laughed at Dad's jokes in a way that made him push his chest out an extra inch. By the time I was 16, she'd become a permanent fixture, a girl who glowed when the porch light touched her, who folded napkins into birds, who said, "Bless your heart," when she didn't agree with you. I tried to like her, I really did. But bless your heart sounds like a compliment when you're a kid, and like a warning when you're old enough to know. Once a year, we did the church rummage sale tables sagging under old sweaters that smelled like cedar and thyme. Mom manned the money box as if it were Fort Knox. I sorted donated books into piles, occasionally finding a note in the margin. Call me, the answer is A. Not see tell. Mrs. H. I tried. I liked the way other people's lives felt when they brushed your hands without knowing. Daniel would show up just long enough to be seen lifting something heavy. Dad would clap him on the back, look over at me and say, "See, that's a man." Then I'd carry 3 boxes to the car without anyone noticing. We were a Midwestern family in every postcard sense. We had a flag on the porch and a grill in the backyard that smoked us out of mosquito season once a week. We had a neighbor named Mr. Benton who mowed his lawn in diagonal stripes that made Mom sigh like she was looking at Paris. We kept up appearances, which is like saying we ironed our faces before church. People in the pews saw our silhouettes and nodded, and I learned to smile small enough to seem grateful and large enough to be polite. The first time I realized what favoritism does to a person, I was 12, holding a birthday cake for Daniel in an oven mitt because the pan was too hot for my bare hands. He was turning 15, and the house was a foamy explosion of boys with big voices. I'd baked him a sheet cake with M&Ms because I didn't have the patience for icing. Mom said my frosting always looked like it had been stepped on. I balanced that cake like it was an offering to a god who didn't accept my prayers. When I stepped into the dining room, Hannah took the cake with a perfect little squeal and set it down, and everyone clapped like she'd baked it herself. It wasn't the clapping that hurt. It was watching Mom angle the candlelight toward Hannah's face when she took the photo. At school, I did what I could to be solid. I sat front row and took notes with the neatness of someone who can't afford to forget. I stocked shelves at Price Right after classes, the smell of cardboard and oranges settling into my hair. The manager liked me because I showed up early and didn't roll my eyes. I liked the money because I could fold it into my pocket and feel the future there. Some nights, I'd bring home day-old bread and a dented can of soup, and Mom would say, "Don't embarrass us, Elena," like being careful with money meant I was holding a sign that said poor on the front lawn. Daniel could knock a hole in the drywall with a careless elbow during a basement ping-pong game, and Dad would say boys and shrug as if the wall had offended him first. We didn't talk about family beyond our walls. There were pictures in dusty frames of a man with a stern mouth and eyes the color of winter road salt standing next to a woman whose smile looked like it had been sewn on. That man was never named. If I asked, Mom would say that side of the family is complicated and stack the photos flat in a drawer the way you hide knives with the blade pointing away from your fingers. I thought every family had a drawer like that. I didn't know some drawers hold maps for when you get lost. When Daniel got his license, Dad tossed him the keys like a movie. My turn that year was a DMV brochure slid under my door with a sticky note. "Ask Hannah to help you study the test." Hannah arrived with color-coded flashcards and a voice like kindergarten. I passed on the first try. No one threw me anything. I held the paper in my hand at the kitchen table and told myself that pride can be quiet without being small. Graduation was a gym that smelled like floor polish and breath mints. Mom sat next to Dad in the bleachers and waved at Daniel as if he were swimming away and might drown without seeing her. When my name was called, she clapped with both hands pressed delicately like she was afraid to bruise the air. Afterward, she took photos of Daniel at every angle, cap off, cap on, cap tipped cap in Hannah's hands, and when I asked for one of the two of us, she said later, "We're losing light." There was always a reason that had nothing to do with the reason. I left home for a semester at community college and came back after the money ran out and the dishwasher broke, and Mom said a full house needs every hand. I took on extra shifts to juggle tuition, but the numbers never liked me as much as they liked Daniel. He found a job at an auto parts warehouse that paid enough to buy big silver tools and a second-hand truck. Dad started saying phrases that had the word man in them again. I learned that sometimes the words you never hear are the ones that stay loudest. Proud, brave, enough. If you asked me now when the resentment turned from a bruise to a scar, I'd say it was the night Mom plated dinner and slid the bigger piece of chicken onto Daniel's plate without looking and the smaller onto mine. It wasn't the meat. It was the muscle memory of it, the ease the years folded in a single motion. I stared at that chicken like it had something to tell me. It did. It said, "You are the person who is expected to take less and smile." The first boy who noticed me was named Connor, a cashier with ink on his fingers from folding receipts. He liked that I was quick at counting change. He liked my hair in a messy ponytail, which was good because it was all I knew how to do. We went to the movies once and he tried to kiss me in the parking lot, speaking a language I didn't share. I laughed a small mean sound, even to my own ears, and said, "Not like that," which is the kind of thing girls say when they're not sure what the rules are. He stopped calling. I learned it was easier to imagine a future than to risk someone else imagining it for you. One winter, the radiator knocked all night like someone trapped inside our walls. Mom put an extra blanket on Daniel's bed and told me to wear socks. I listened to the pipes complain and thought about how houses are like bodies. They hold the heat where it's wanted and let the cold sit on your bones where it isn't. By the time Daniel proposed to Hannah at a 4th of July picnic sparkler smoked potato salad cheers, I was 20, standing behind a folding table holding a stack of red cups like a waitress at a party I hadn't been invited to. Dad hugged Hannah and called her sweetheart and told her welcome to the family like she hadn't been at our dinner table 3 nights a week for 4 years. Mom cried and dabbed her eyes with a napkin that left white fuzz on her cheek. When the fireworks started, I watched the sky open like a bruise blooming and wondered if love always made noise or if sometimes the quiet kinds were stronger. There was a photograph from that night that I saw once briefly before it vanished into whatever album Mom curated in her mind. Daniel and Hannah were kissing under a smear of light confetti in their hair. Off to the side, a bit out of frame, I was laughing at something Mr. Benton said about his lawnmower head thrown back mouth open. It startled me when I saw it because I didn't recognize the sound that face was making. Joy looks different when you're not used to seeing it on yourself. I didn't know it then, but I'd need to remember that version of me later when silence would feel safer than hope. I wish I could tell you I left that night for a bright city and clawed my way up and never looked back. But the truth is smaller and closer. I stayed, I worked, I kept a ledger in my head of everything I gave and everything I didn't get back. And then, one afternoon in the grocery aisle between canned tomatoes and spaghetti, I met a man with grease under his nails and a smile that warmed me like a heater that finally kicked on. His name was Brandon, and when he asked if I knew where to find the good coffee, I didn't know yet that he'd lead me to the coldest night of my life. I didn't know it then, but it would come back to haunt me. Brandon wasn't like the boys I'd known in town. He had a way of leaning in when you spoke as if every word mattered, even when I was rambling about coupon sales or the quirks of my manager at the store. His laugh was rough but warm, like gravel poured into honey. He drove a beat-up Ford with a cracked windshield, but when he opened the door for me, I felt like I was stepping into something better than I'd ever been offered. The first dates were cheap diner booths under buzzing neon French fries shared across the table, late-night drives to nowhere with the windows rolled down and the radio turned low. He made me feel like the empty parts of my life could be filled just by being wanted. After a while, I stopped noticing the way grease always lingered on his knuckles or how his stories never quite added up. I wanted to believe in a version of myself who was loved without condition. When we told my parents, Mom pursed her lips like she was swallowing vinegar. Dad nodded once and said, "As long as he works hard." Daniel smirked and clapped Brandon on the shoulder, the kind of gesture that looked supportive but carried a weight of superiority. Hannah hugged me in front of everyone and whispered, "Good for you, Elena," in a tone that suggested she meant the opposite. I smiled anyway because that's what I'd been trained to do. Swallow the sting, pretend it didn't hurt. Our wedding was small, not the kind with white tents and photographers. We rented the church basement, the same one Mom used for rummage sales decorated with streamers that sagged in the humidity. Brandon wore a suit that didn't quite fit. I wore a borrowed dress with a hem pinned up. When I walked down the aisle, Dad gave me away with a stiff pat on the arm. He didn't even look at me, just kept his eyes forward like he was handing off a package. But Brandon's smile when he saw me, it was the kind of smile you memorize because you know it might not last forever. The first year, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The place always smelled like detergent and steam, but I didn't mind. We ate boxed mac and cheese on folding chairs, laughed at sitcom reruns, and built a life out of whatever scraps we had. When Sophie was born, the walls seemed to glow. I held her in my arms and thought finally, here is someone who will never see me as less. But happiness has a way of slipping through the cracks. Brandon started picking up extra shifts at the factory, or so he said. He came home late, the scent of motor oil mixed with perfume that wasn't mine. His phone buzzed constantly, and he angled the screen away from me. At first, I told myself it was stress that the bills and the crying baby were just too much. But deep down, a familiar chill crept in, the same one I'd felt when Mom compared me to Daniel when Dad praised Hannah's cooking instead of mine. It was the feeling of being second place in my own story. One night, Sophie was asleep in her crib, her tiny fists curled under her chin, and I finally asked Brandon, "Are we okay?" He didn't look up from his phone. Yeah, fine. His eyes were tired, but not from work. They were tired of me. The night I found the message, my whole body shook. A woman's name I didn't recognize. Words that cut like blades. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Don't let her suspect. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. Brandon walked in, saw the screen, and for a second, his face went pale like he'd been caught stealing. I whispered, "Who is she?" My voice cracked like glass. He sighed, almost annoyed, and said, "Elena, I can't do this anymore. I don't love you the way I used to. I've met someone else." He didn't beg. He didn't fight. His suitcase was already by the door. He kissed Sophie's forehead, not even glancing at me, and walked out. The sound of that door closing was louder than any slammed fist. After he left, the apartment grew unbearably silent. The hum of the fridge sounded like mockery. The creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I paced the room with Sophie in my arms, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep mommies here. We'll figure it out. Bills piled up on the counter, rent notices taped to the door. I skipped meals so Sophie wouldn't. Coffee became my dinner exhaustion, my pillow. When I couldn't hold on any longer, I called the only people left, my parents. My voice broke as I asked, "Can Sophie and I stay for a while, just until I get back on my feet?" There was silence. Then Mom sighed. "You can come, but don't expect this to be permanent. It wasn't love. It wasn't kindness. But it was a roof. And for Sophie, I swallowed my pride and said, 'Thank you.' I didn't know then how quickly even that roof would vanish. My parents' house hadn't changed, but somehow it had shrunk. The hallway felt narrower. The framed school photos of Daniel leaned out from the wall like spectators, and my old bedroom had turned into a storage shed with a window. Stacks of plastic bins climbed toward the ceiling. A broken floor lamp drooped in the corner like a dying sunflower. When Mom opened the door, she didn't say welcome back. She just said, "You'll need to clear this out. Don't touch the boxes labeled Christmas." Her voice made me think of a measuring cup, precise, stingy, exact. I set Sophie's car seat on the sagging mattress and looked for a place to put her clothes. There wasn't one. I folded tiny onesies and rolled socks into the shoe organizer that used to hold my high school hair clips. The room smelled like dust and lemon cleaner and the faint sweetness of the lotion I used to wear when I still believed in prom. Sophie blew bubbles at me, oblivious. I kissed her forehead and told her we'd make it work, because that's what you say when the truth would be too heavy to put in a crib. In the living room, Dad sat in his recliner with the TV remote like a scepter. He barely glanced over when I came down to ask if they had any extra trash bags. "Keep the baby quiet," he said. "I have an early morning." He didn't ask how we were, whether we'd eaten, whether we had a plan. The TV hummed about weather and stocks and people whose names didn't sound like mine. Mom clattered pots in the kitchen as if volume could be a boundary. I washed my hands at the sink and watched the backyard through the window, the same patch of grass where I'd practiced cartwheels alone until the light went blue. At dinner, Mom set a plate in front of me with a smaller scoop of mashed potatoes than hers and said, "Elena, you'll need to contribute toward groceries. We can't carry your burden forever." Her voice slid neatly over Sophie as if a 1-year-old could be an invoice. I said yes because no felt like a match I couldn't afford to strike. Daniel and Hannah showed up midway through with a bag of artisan bread and a six-pack that Dad praised like a sacrificial lamb. Hannah's hair gleamed in a way that made me want to rub mine with a dryer sheet. She sliced the bread, laid the pieces perfectly fanned, and asked, "How's the little angel?" without getting close enough to smudge her blouse. "She's good," I said. "She likes the sound of the washing machine." It wasn't conversation. It was proof of life. Hannah smiled and nodded as if I'd given the correct answer on a test. Daniel kissed Mom's cheek and told a story about traffic on the highway that made Dad laugh so hard he wheezed. When Sophie fussed, I took her into the hallway where the air felt cooler and smelled faintly of bleach. I rocked her against my shoulder cheek to her hair and counted the thuds of my heart until she softened. When I came back, my place at the table had a ring of condensation from someone else's glass. I started a part-time shift at the diner off Route 17, the one with chrome stools and a coffee pot that never seemed to empty. The manager Lenny had a cigarette voice and a calendar from last year. He handed me a pen and a stack of order pads and said, "Smile, but not so much it looks fake." Grease hung in the air like a curtain. My shoes stuck to the floor in a tacky communion with 1,000 spilled Cokes. I learned the regulars quickly: the trucker who ordered eggs over hard and left napkins folded into birds, the high school teachers who split a slice of pie and grated quietly, the woman with lavender hair who ate soup every Tuesday like it was medicine. I liked memorizing what people wanted before they asked. It made me feel attached to a rhythm I wasn't allowed to conduct. At night, I'd come home smelling like onions and fryer oil and slide a few bills under Mom's magnet on the fridge. She never said thank you. She moved the magnet and pinned the cash flat like butterflies. "Just so we're clear," she said one night, straightening the stack, "this doesn't make you entitled to anything." I didn't know what anything meant in that sentence. A bed, a kind word, a hallway unpoliced. I nodded and climbed the stairs to the storage room with the mattress and the lamp that didn't work. Sophie began to crawl, then hands flat against the carpet like tiny swimmers. She loved the pattern of sunlight on the wall at a certain hour, the way dust turned into snowflakes if you looked just right. I brought her outside to the back step when the weather was kind and let her pat the warm concrete with her palm. She laughed at the neighbor's dog. For 5 minutes at a time, I forgot I was an unpaid tenant in a house that didn't want me. When Daniel and Hannah visited on weekends, the house transformed. Mom pulled out the good plates and the cloth napkins with stitched corners. She roasted chicken with lemon wedges and sprigs of rosemary like a magazine. Dad told his best stories, the ones where he won, the ones where his son won. Hannah brought a salad that looked like a garden had dressed up for church. Here, she'd say, "Setting it down like a gift." Mom kissed her cheek and said, "You always know how to elevate things." I tried not to calculate how many diapers one sprig of rosemary cost. Sometimes Daniel's friends came by with their kids, small hurricanes in light-up sneakers. Mom scooped them up and made the sound grandmothers make when they see a future they approve of. Sophie reached toward her once chubby fingers, opening and closing, and Mom said, "Not now, I'm holding Liam," as if love had a cue and Sophie didn't have a number. I told myself not to mind. I told myself the math would even out. I told myself a lot of things so I wouldn't have to tell myself the truth. One afternoon, I came home from a double shift to find Hannah in my room rifling through a bin labeled fall decor. She startled when she saw me and put on a smile the way someone puts on a jacket to step onto a porch. "I didn't want to bother your mom," she said. "Daniel's thinking of hosting Friendsgiving. We thought the pumpkin garlands would be cute." She looked around at the bins and the crib and my folded life, and for a second I saw her register it, the smallness, the makeshift, but the recognition vanished like a blink. "Anyway, do you mind?" she said. What I minded could have filled the house. I said, "Go ahead." On Tuesdays, Dad had poker night. Men with heavy hands and light stories crowded the dining room and made the house smell like beer and aftershave. I carried Sophie upstairs early on those nights and told her a new story I made up about a brave rabbit who lived in a field of dandelions and always found his way home. She fell asleep with her fist around my finger, a grip that said there was at least one thing in this world that was sure. The day the fever started, the air had that metal taste that comes before rain. Sophie's cheeks flushed pink, her eyes glassy with heat. I took her temperature and the number glowed too high. I carried her downstairs to the couch and asked Mom for help with the same voice I used to ask for glue in kindergarten. "She's burning up. I think I should take her in." Mom didn't glance up from her phone. "Babies run hot. Give her water." She tapped another message. "You need to learn responsibility, Elena. We already raised our kids." The words slid into my skin and settled there. I rocked Sophie on the couch and whispered to her, "It's okay. I've got you. It's okay." I was saying it for both of us. I was saying it so I would believe it. When I finally got a ride from Tammy, the night waitress, to the urgent care on the edge of town, the nurse told me I'd done the right thing. "She's dehydrated," she said, "but you brought her in. She'll be fine." I cried then, not because Sophie was safe, but because someone had used the word right at me and meant it. Bills stacked themselves with the obedient malice of paper. Rent notices, co-pays, little orange receipts that looked harmless until they weren't. Lenny at the diner cut my hours when the new girl started. You'll bounce back, he said, which is what people say when they hope you won't fall on their floor. I picked up extra shifts on graveyards and came home when the sun made the kitchen yellow and everything else looked the same. The day I overheard them, the house was quiet in that particular way that means something is being planned. Sophie had finally gone down for a nap, her breath small and even. I went to the kitchen for water and heard Mom's voice low in the living room, the TV on mute, the sound of their conversation like footsteps on a stage. I froze in the doorway of the hall, my back to the cool wall, the old paint slightly gritty under my palms. "We can't keep doing this," Dad said. "Daniel and Hannah are coming every weekend now. They need a room for the boys." "She's in there with that baby," Mom said, and the word baby felt like a slur in her mouth. "We didn't plan to run a hostel." "She should be standing on her own by now," Dad said. 2 weeks. That's fair. Something slid in my stomach, a drawer opening. 2 weeks. The words went through me like a medicine I couldn't swallow. I saw the bins in my room, the crib, the tiny socks rolled inside a shoe organizer, and I tried to do the math of where, of how, of what next. My water glass sweated in my grip. I thought of knocking on the doorway and saying, "I can hear you. I live here. I have ears. I am not a ghost." Instead, I backed into the hall and stood very still and listened to my own heart until it came back from wherever it had run. That night, I fed Sophie in the chair by the window and watched the neighbor's porch light blink off. The street went dark in a way that always felt like swallowing. I started packing in my head. Not because I had somewhere to go, but because sometimes packing is the only way to keep from breaking. Diapers. The quilt Mrs. Benton gave me when Sophie was born, the one with blue triangles that looked like mountains. 2 bottles. The photo of Sophie with frosting on her cheek from the time Tammy brought cupcakes to the diner. My hands moved without moving. My mind folded. I thought about asking Daniel for help and knew the shape of his face when he'd say, "You know how tight things are right now." I thought about asking Hannah and heard the click of her kindness sliding into place without opening. I thought about going to church and imagined the line in the basement pantry and the way my mother would hold her mouth if she saw me there. I thought about calling Brandon and tasted pennies. Sophie stirred her lashes flickering like moth wings. I put my finger on her palm and she grabbed it in her sleep. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here." The house creaked, old wood shifting ghosts of our feet rearranging themselves. Somewhere in the dark, a clock I couldn't see kept time. 2 weeks ticked like a metronome, steady, indifferent. I didn't know yet about the bridge about the rain that would find us under concrete and name itself winter in my bones. I didn't know a man in a black suit would step out of that weather and say my name like it was a key. What I knew was this: rooms can eject you, families can vote you off the island, love can be rationed like soup, and sometimes the only way to survive is to start counting backward from a number someone else chose. The 2-week deadline hung over me like a neon sign I couldn't turn off. Every night when I tucked Sophie into her crib, I counted the days left in my head. 13, 12, 11. My parents carried on like nothing had changed, but their voices carried sharp edges now, every conversation a reminder that we were temporary, inconvenient, disposable. At the diner, I pushed myself harder, smiling wider, carrying heavier trays, but exhaustion showed. I felt it in the ache of my wrists, in the way my shoes peeled from the sticky floor with reluctant sighs. One Friday, Sophie's sitter canceled, and I had no choice but to bring her in. I parked her stroller in the corner of the break room, whispering promises of crackers and lullabies if she stayed quiet. But babies don't make deals. She cried during the dinner rush, her small voice piercing through clattering plates and coffee refills. Lenny stormed in his face, red from fryer heat and anger. "This isn't a daycare, Elena," he snapped. "I don't have anyone else," I pleaded. "I'll keep her quiet." "You're done. Pick up your check." The words sliced deeper than any insult. Customers stared as I carried Sophie out, shame burning hotter than the August air. That night, I sat in the car engine off Sophie's breath, soft against my shoulder, and wondered how quickly a life could unravel. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears felt useless, like water poured on a fire already burned to ash. A week later, the landlord knocked at the boarding house we'd scraped into after my parents' first eviction threat. He had yellowed teeth and a ledger he held like scripture. "You're behind. Out by tomorrow. Please," I begged, clutching Sophie on my hip. "One more week. I'll find work." He shook his head. "Tomorrow." The next day, our belongings were stacked in the hallway. A duffel bag of Sophie's clothes, a bag of diapers, my old coat. Rain smeared the windows like greasy fingerprints. I dialed my parents one last time, desperation raw in my voice. "Mom, Dad, please. We have nowhere to go. Sophie's sick." Dad's reply was cold as stone. "Daniel and Hannah are coming this weekend. We don't have space. You'll figure it out." The line clicked dead. That night under the bridge, I realized how disposable we were in their eyes. And still, some part of me kept taking mental notes, collecting every word, every slight, evidence in a trial I hadn't scheduled yet. Mini drama 1, I overheard Hannah laughing in the kitchen with Mom about how Elena always finds drama. I stood in the doorway with Sophie on my hip unseen and memorized the exact curl of Hannah's lip. Mini drama 2. Daniel bragged about his promotion and Dad clapped him on the back, saying, "That's how you provide for family." I swallowed the bitter taste, thinking about the crumpled bills I slid under Mom's fridge magnet every week, bills that never bought me a word of praise. Mini drama 3. I found a letter in the mail stack addressed to Hamilton Holdings, torn open and shoved back. The name pricked something in me, Hamilton, like the grandfather I'd seen in the photos they buried in drawers. Mom snatched it from my hand before I could read more. "Not your concern," she hissed, but it was. The letters kept coming, and every time I saw that name, it scratched louder at the back of my mind. Mini drama 4. One afternoon, I caught Dad in the garage with a folder of old deeds and bank statements. He shoved them into a box when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, but his eyes held fear. I said nothing, but I remembered the name Hamilton stamped on the top sheet. Mini drama 5. I tried to apply for daycare assistant sitting in a fluorescent-lit office with Sophie squirming on my lap. The woman behind the counter tapped at her keyboard, then shook her head. "Your parents' address is still on file. Their income counts toward yours." She gave me a polite but final smile. "You don't qualify." I walked out with Sophie in my arms, fury boiling. My parents' wealth, or at least the wealth they claimed, was being used to deny me help even as they called me a burden. Every slight was a brick, and I stacked them silently inside me. Evidence, proof, a ledger no one else could see. The breaking point came late one night. I was heating a bottle in the kitchen when I heard Mom and Dad again, voices low but sharp. "She'll never make it on her own," Mom said. "But we can't keep sacrificing Daniel's family for her mistakes." "Victor's money was supposed to be ours," Dad muttered. "If she ever finds out the truth," I froze, bottle trembling in my hand. Victor. The name was a bullet fired into the dark. "What if she asks?" Mom whispered. "She won't. She's too busy surviving. And if she does, she'll find nothing. I made sure of it." The bottle slipped, clattered against the counter. They looked up, startled. I forced a smile, muttered something about being tired, and carried Sophie back to our room. My pulse hammered in my throat. Victor. Hamilton. A truth buried in drawers and boxes. A family history rewritten to erase someone. I lay awake that night, Sophie's warm breath on my chest, and I knew they hadn't just failed me. They'd stolen something bigger, a legacy that should have been mine. But how to prove it? How to drag ghosts into daylight? I started quietly. At the diner, I asked a retired lawyer who came in on Wednesdays about inheritance laws. He explained in simple words, if property or money is misappropriated, there's always a paper trail. At the library, I sifted through public records, fingers blackened with ink eyes burning under fluorescent lights. Deeds, corporate filings, names that repeated like refrains. Hamilton Holdings, Victor Hamilton, Thomas Carter. Piece by piece, the story formed. My father had once been the son of a wealthy man. A man erased from our dinner table, from our family tree. A man my father had betrayed. I couldn't confront them yet, not without more. not without a weapon sharp enough to cut through years of lies. So I stayed silent, gathered more, wore my invisibility like armor. At night, rocking Sophie, I whispered one day, "One day they'll see." And in the silence, after I asked myself a question that kept me awake, when that day came, would I want revenge or would I need it? That question burned hotter than hunger, brighter than fear. It became the fire that kept me moving forward. I didn't know yet that the answer would find me under that bridge in the rain when a man in a black suit spoke my name and gave me the truth I'd been starving for. When Victor pulled me and Sophie out from under that bridge, I thought it was just rescue, shelter, a reprieve from the storm. But it was more than that. It was the opening move in a game I hadn't realized I'd been forced to play since birth. The mansion in Florida felt unreal at first. Cream-colored walls, polished marble staff who looked me in the eye with kindness instead of pity. But Victor didn't coddle me. He didn't shower me with luxury and call it love. Instead, he poured black coffee in the mornings, sat me down at the long oak table and said, "If you want a future, you'll have to build it. I'll give you tools, not crutches." So I listened, I watched, I learned. Hamilton Properties towered over downtown Tampa glass walls, catching the sunlight like a blade. On my first day there, Victor introduced me simply, "This is Elena. She's here to learn. Treat her as you would anyone starting from the ground floor. No hint of favoritism, no disclosure of bloodlines." My last name meant nothing in that office. Whispers started immediately. "Who is she?" "Charity case, Victor's." "What girlfriend?" Niece every laugh felt sharpened. Every side-eye was a test. Julia, a senior agent with calm eyes and a quick wit, took me under her wing. "Ignore the noise," she said. "Learn the contracts. Listen more than you speak." So I did. At night, after Sophie fell asleep in her crib, now cushioned with toys I could never have afforded, before I sat at the desk in my room and copied real estate terms into a notebook escrow appraisal contingency. I whispered them aloud, tasting their shape until they no longer felt like a foreign tongue. I practiced conversations in the mirror, forcing my voice steady. "This home is more than numbers. It's your story waiting to be written." Sometimes I stumbled. Sometimes I cried, but I never stopped. Julia tested me. She handed me fake contracts riddled with mistakes and timed me with her phone. "You missed clause 14, she'd say. Or, "You caught it. Good. Now do it faster." She wasn't gentle, but she was fair, the first person in years who expected more from me because she believed I could deliver. Meanwhile, I kept cataloging. Every word my parents had spit at me, every eviction, every slammed door, they weren't just memories anymore. They were ammunition. Evidence waiting for the right courtroom, the right stage. Victor watched me carefully. "Revenge," he said one evening, his voice low, as the dusk can destroy or transform. "You have to decide which." "I don't want to destroy," I told him. "I want to show them I was never what they said I was." "Good." He sipped his coffee. "Then let your success be the loudest weapon. But success takes planning. Step 1, master the business." I spent 6 months shadowing Julia, then taking small clients on my own. I learned to ask questions that mattered not "What's your budget?" but "Where do you see yourself at Christmas? Who do you want sitting at your table?" People bought houses because they wanted safety, belonging, memory. I knew those hungers better than anyone. Step 2, build credibility. Every paycheck I put aside savings. I opened a separate account under Sophie's name. I paid off lingering debts one by one until the old chains loosened. Step 3, prepare for confrontation. I gathered every scrap of paperwork Victor could find, old deeds, forged signatures, the proof of what my father had stolen decades ago. We hired a lawyer, a quiet man with sharp eyes, to verify every document. "It's airtight," he said, "but you'll need to choose how public this goes." Step 4, fortify Sophie. I enrolled her in a private preschool where she learned songs I didn't know and came home with art projects of sunbursts and rainbows. I made sure she felt roots where I had none. But I also warned myself children become targets when adults go to war. Some nights after Sophie was asleep, I paced the balcony, feeling the Florida breeze on my skin, thinking about timing. If I confronted too early, they'd twist it, call me ungrateful, hysterical. If I waited too long, they might come for Victor again, like they had before. One evening, Julia found me in the office, staring at a contract I couldn't focus on. "What's really on your mind?" she asked. I hesitated, then said, "My family doesn't believe I belong anywhere. I want to prove them wrong, but I don't know if that's revenge or survival." She leaned on the desk. "Why can't it be both?" That night I wrote in my notebook, "Survival, Clark Foundation. Revenge, Parth Echo. One builds, one answers." So I built. I closed my first sale, then another. Clients began asking for me by name. Whispers in the office turned grudgingly respectful. After a year, the board promoted me to junior partner. Victor didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Now," he said, "you're ready." Ready for what I asked myself. Ready for the day Thomas and Linda Carter, with Daniel at their side, would walk through those glass doors pretending they hadn't tried to erase me. Ready to lay their sins bare in front of witnesses. Ready to show them that the daughter they'd called a burden had become the woman holding their fate. The plan was simple but brutal. Let them come to me. Don't chase them. Don't beg. Don't explain. Let them arrive thinking they could use me and then reveal in one clean strike that the power had shifted entirely. I pictured it often, the lobby gleaming, Sophie's photo on my desk upstairs, their faces when they realized the inheritance they'd buried had come back through me, multiplied, undeniable. Patience, Victor reminded me. They'll come when they smell opportunity. That's when you strike. And he was right. Because gossip spreads faster than fire, and soon enough they did hear of me. The runaway daughter, the abandoned wife, the single mother turned CEO. Headlines printed what my parents never believed: Elena Carter, new face of Hamilton Properties. I folded each article and set it beside the ledger in my drawer, the invisible courtroom filling with evidence waiting for its trial. I was no longer counting days of eviction. I was counting days until confrontation. And when it came, I promised myself I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't beg. I would look them in the eye and let silence carry the weight of everything they had thrown away, because silence, sharpened by truth, can cut deeper than any scream. The morning it happened, the air in the lobby of Hamilton Properties was cool and polished, smelling faintly of lemon wax and money. Sunlight streamed through the wall of glass, catching in the marble floors, turning every reflection into something sharper than real. I stood near the reception desk, Sophie's photo tucked inside my office upstairs, my heart steady as if it had been training for this day. Ms. Carter Emily from reception said, her voice low, hesitant. "There are visitors here asking for you." I turned, and there they were. My parents. Thomas in an outdated suit that looked borrowed from someone with broader shoulders, Linda in a wool coat that had seen too many winters. Behind them stood Daniel and Hannah, polished, smiling like politicians on the campaign trail. For a moment, the air folded back into time. I saw the kitchen where Dad told me to keep the baby quiet, the dining table where Mom measured mashed potatoes onto my plate like portions of love, the hallway where I heard them plotting my eviction, Sophie's fevered forehead against my palm, the rain under the bridge. Then the vision dissolved, and I was back in my company's lobby with dozens of employees pretending not to stare while their eyes clung to every detail. Elena Mom said brightly, as if she were greeting me at Thanksgiving dinner, "Honey, you've done so well for yourself." Her voice was sugared poison, and the employees heard the tremor underneath. Dad stepped forward, his smile taut. "We saw you on TV. We thought it's time we reconnect. Family should stick together, don't you think, family?" The word tasted like rust. I let the silence stretch long enough that the receptionist looked down at her keyboard, long enough that a few whispers rose from the mezzanine above. "You want to reconnect," I said slowly, my voice carrying across marble and glass after the night you locked the door on me and my daughter. After the calls you ignored when I begged you for help. After you told me I was nothing but a burden. Daniel's smirk flickered. "That was years ago, Elena. We all said things. No, I cut in. You said things. I lived them." Mom's smile cracked. "You can't hold on to the past forever." I tilted my head. "Can't I? Because the past seems to be standing in my lobby right now pretending to be family." Employees stopped pretending not to watch. Phones were half-hidden recording. The scene had shifted into theater, and I was no longer the outcast daughter, I was the one with the stage. And then Victor entered. The double glass doors swung open, and he walked in with his cane, his black suit, precise silver hair gleaming under the morning light. He moved with the slow authority of someone who no longer had to prove anything, only remind the world of what had been stolen from him. Thomas froze. His face drained. "Dad, you're alive!" The words rang hollow, bouncing off marble landing like stones at his feet. Victor's eyes were cold fire. Alive, yes. Alive and watching. Alive long enough to see every betrayal repeated. "You stole from me, Thomas. You spread lies that buried me before my time. And then you turned that cruelty on your own daughter, just as you once turned it on me." Gasps rippled through the lobby. A courier paused mid-step. A security guard shifted, uncertain. Dad stammered, I can explain." "No," Victor said. "You can't. Not to me. Not to her. Not to the people who witnessed your daughter standing in the rain carrying her child with nothing because you chose comfort for Daniel over survival for Elena." Mom reached for Dad's arm, her face pale. "Please, we were doing our best." "Your best," I said. My voice steady was saving your good plates for Daniel and his children while mine cried from hunger. Your best was telling me Sophie wasn't family while you rocked Hannah's boys in your arms. Your best was turning away when I begged. Daniel bristled, his voice low and sharp. "This isn't the place for your sob story. You're here because of him." He jerked his chin toward Victor, "Not because you earned it." I stepped closer, letting my heels strike the floor like punctuation. "No, Daniel. I earned every inch. Every contract signed, every client who chose me because I listened when no one else did. This company trusted me before it even knew my bloodline. I stand here as CEO because I fought for it while you played the golden child in a house built on lies." Victor lifted a folder from under his arm, his hand steady despite his age. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. "The deeds, the signatures, the proof of what was taken. Today, Elena, you decide how much of this to expose." The folder felt heavy in my hands, heavy with decades of silence and betrayal. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. My voice was enough. "I don't need papers to prove what you are," I said, looking straight at Thomas and Linda. "Everyone here has already seen it. You left me to die in the cold, and now you want a seat at the table I built." The silence after was sharper than any scream. Employees shifted, whispers hissed, phones recorded. Dad's lips trembled. "Elena, please. We're still your parents." "No," I said, my voice like glass. "Parents don't lock the door on their child and her baby. Parents don't choose comfort over blood. The day you cast us out, I lost my parents, and I haven't missed them since." Mom covered her mouth. Daniel's jaw tightened. Hannah's eyes darted nervously to the onlookers, calculating what this humiliation would cost their polished image. Victor's cane struck the marble, once a sound like a gavel. "It's done." I turned away from them, the folder still closed in my hand. I didn't need revenge written in ink. I had it here in the lobby, in their silence, in the shame etched into their faces as they realized the daughter they'd discarded had become the woman with all the power. I walked toward the elevator, my back straight, my heart pounding steady. The crowd parted for me, eyes wide, voices hushed. Behind me, I heard the glass doors open again, the shuffle of retreating footsteps. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outcast in my own family. I felt like the verdict. And when the elevator doors closed, I let myself smile, not a bitter smile, but one carved from survival, from victory, from the promise that Sophie would never know the taste of being disposable, because this was only the beginning. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, my legs trembled with the adrenaline I hadn't allowed myself to show downstairs. I stepped into my office, shut the door behind me, and leaned against it for a moment, breathing hard. Sophie's framed photo sat on my desk, her gap-toothed smile, her hand clutching a crayon. I touched the glass with my fingertips and whispered, "We did it, baby." Down below, I knew the whispers were already spreading through the company like wildfire. The staff had seen everything: my parents' desperation, Victor's truth, the moment power shifted in front of everyone. No boardroom vote could have validated me more. The story of the Carter family wasn't just mine anymore. It was public, and there was no taking it back. That evening, I asked Victor what would happen to them now. He sat in his armchair on the mansion balcony, the Florida twilight soft around us. "Your father will scramble," he said. "He'll try to cover his tracks to make excuses. But lies have a short half-life when exposed to light." He looked at me steadily. "You don't need to lift a finger. Their own shame will undo them." And he was right. Within weeks, the echo reached me. Daniel lost a contract at his firm when a client whispered about that scene at Hamilton Properties. Hannah's social circle shrank. Women who once fawned over her stopped inviting her to luncheons. Mom sent one message through a cousin: "We just wanted to be part of your success." I didn't answer. Some words don't deserve oxygen. Yet victory felt complicated. Some mornings I'd pour Sophie's cereal, watch her chatter about school, and feel a hollow space inside me. Revenge had given me closure, yes, but it hadn't erased the years I'd begged for crumbs of love, hadn't rewritten the cold nights with no home. The silence of their rejection still echoed, softer now, but present. One night, Sophie climbed into my lap, her hair smelling of soap and crayons. "Mommy," she asked, "why don't we see Grandma and Grandpa?" I kissed her forehead. "Because not everyone who's called family acts like family." "But you," I whispered, holding her close, "you'll always have me. And that's enough." She nodded content and drifted off against my chest, and I realized revenge had freed me, but Sophie was what saved me. Still, part of me knew this story wasn't finished. Daniel's last words before leaving the lobby still scraped in my memory. "This isn't over." There was venom in his voice, a promise more than a threat. He was the kind of man who saw losing not as a lesson but as an insult, and men like that don't rest. They plot. I found myself preparing without even meaning to. Double-checking security at the mansion, keeping records of every interaction, building allies in the company who trusted me for more than my last name. Because revenge is rarely the final chapter, it's the hinge that swings open to the next battle. Late one evening, I stood at the window of my office, the city lights glittering like 1,000 tiny witnesses. Victor joined me, his cane tapping softly. "You stood taller than I ever did," he said. "You carried the weight of their betrayal and turned it into power. But don't mistake today's victory for the end." I looked out over Tampa's skyline and nodded. "I know. Daniel won't let this go. And when he comes, I'll be ready." Inside me, there was no trembling now, only steel. They thought throwing me out would destroy me. They thought I'd fade, forgotten, a burden erased. But all they did was hand me the one weapon they never imagined I'd wield: the truth. And the truth doesn't just cut, it lingers. Was revenge enough? Or had it only opened the door to the war my family had been hiding all along? That was the question I carried into the night, the question that would follow me into whatever came next. Weeks later, life felt different. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was shaping something new. With Victor's support, I launched a program through Hamilton Properties to help single parents find affordable housing. The first family I handed keys to cried in my arms, and I thought, this is the legacy Sophie will inherit. At home, she twirled in our kitchen, laughter echoing through walls that finally felt safe. For the first time, the word family meant choice, not chains. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, subscribe. This story isn't over.